Let's bring in independent Congressman Kevin Kiley of California. He switched from the Republican Party just last month. Congressman, thank you for being here. So next week, this war with Iran hits that 60-day mark. And under the War Powers Resolution of 1973, the president must terminate the use of armed forces after 60 days unless Congress authorizes military action. You voted against the last two War Powers resolutions in the House. Does your position change if this war hits that 60-day mark?
Well, it doesn't change in the sense that I've said from the very beginning that Congress needs to be centrally involved in the plan going forward and the resolution of this conflict and what our ultimate objectives here are. Now, the War Powers Resolution is not really a way to have any meaningful impact because it requires a signature of the president. So it's really just a way to send a message. And then even if somehow the veto was overridden, there are enough questions about its constitutionality that it's not clear that that is the best mechanism for Congress to assert itself.
Then what do you suggest?
What Congress does has, we're right, is the power of the purse. That the administration is proposing a very large supplemental funding request. There's a $1.5 trillion appropriations request coming in. And so that is Congress's best, most meaningful, most impactful opportunity to weigh in on the course of this conflict in a way that brings it to an expeditious conclusion consistent with U.S. national security interests.
Here is the president yesterday when he was asked about bringing this war to a conclusion and the timeline on reaching some kind of peace deal with Iran.
On the war with Iran, how long are you willing to wait until you get a unified response?
Don't rush me, Jeff. Guys like you want to say, oh, so we were in Vietnam like for 18 years. We were in Iraq for many, many years. We're in for all the, I don't like to say World War II because that was a biggie, but we were 4.5, almost 5 years in World War II. We were in the Korean War for 7 years. I've been doing this for 6 weeks.
It's actually been more like 8 weeks. Bottom line, President Trump doesn't seem concerned now with any timeline in this war. Does that concern you that this could drag on much longer?
Well, I'm certainly going to do everything I can to assure that it doesn't drag on into some sort of protracted conflict, because those other examples that he mentions, these are examples of the sort of things that we don't want. These are the bad precedents. These are the sort of endless conflicts that Americans have been very clear that we don't want to entangle ourselves in. So this is why I think it's so important that we have congressional buy-in, because, the president has his own style for these things and he has these push and pull tactics, and there is some place for that in diplomacy. But if we're going to reach a resolution that's going to be durable, we need to have buy-in from Congress as well as from our allies in the region and around the world. Consider, for example, the objective that has by far the most bipartisan international support, assuring Iran does not get a nuclear weapon. This is absolutely paramount, and I think that most people would agree with that. But if we reach a resolution designed to assure that outcome, moving forward, it needs to have buy-in from a lot of different parties to make sure that that actually has teeth and is something meaningful.
I want to move on because we have this other breaking news today. U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro saying she is now closing the probe into Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. I first just want to get your reaction to this news.
Well, I think that's good. I said when this first started that it was really bizarre. This isn't the way that we usually handle, cost overruns for buildings. Of course, there's a place for congressional oversight for that sort of thing. There probably needs to be more congressional oversight when it comes to cost overruns. But the idea of criminalizing the matter, I think, was very troubling. The independence of the Federal Reserve is a foundational principle for our country. It is really a bedrock principle when it comes to our economic prosperity and the ability of many actors in our society to plan in a rational way. And so any threat to that, whether direct or indirect, whether express or implied, I think is something that's very concerning. And I'm glad that this has now been removed sort of into the appropriate sort of oversight function, which is where it should have been in the first place.
Does this move to you suggest the original case was baseless and politically motivated?
Well, clearly there was a very good reason that they've decided to go down this route now. I don't know what their reasons were for opening up a criminal probe to begin with, but as I said at the time, it is very much out of the ordinary and is on its face something that I think we would want to avoid because of the fact that you have this principle of the independence of the Federal Reserve, and any sort of intersection of criminal or politics with that will have very bad consequences, I think, for the country.
And just real quickly, because this also comes after the hearing this week with Kevin Warsh, President Trump's nominee to become the next Fed chair when Jerome Powell's time in that role expires, which is next month. Do you think that they are dropping the criminal case because Thom Tillis stood up to the administration and he dug in, refusing to confirm Kevin Warsh as the next Fed chair until this matter was resolved?
That could well be. I know that Senator Tillis took a very strong stand, and his reason for doing so was precisely the principle that I just articulated, that the independence of the Federal Reserve is sacrosanct in our system. And so I very much admire Senator Tillis. I think he's someone who has been always willing to be independent, and I've partnered with him on a number of initiatives on intellectual property, among others. So, yeah, I think he's someone who'll very much be missed in Washington.